Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. I was about to say challenge, which is apparently what words are for me right now. A challenge. Anyhow, um, and today I'm going to be talking about the long list again, but now the final one, case study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet. And I read this a bit ago, so I don't know why it's taken me so long to actually record a review for this one. But anyway, this is his second time in the long list. He was shortlisted way back, I believe in 2013. This is a book that I really greatly enjoyed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Again, sort of heads up that spoilers will come later, but I will let you know before that happens. So I'll try to do the majority of this review spoiler free. And then there'll be a little bit of sort of spoilers at the end to talk about bits of this book. And particularly the nature of this book means that spoilers kind of might come up. So I'll try and do as much as I can spoiler free first. And feel free to cut out whenever you need to on that note as well. Anyway, let's get started with this book. So, case study. This book, as the title suggests, has an element of case study to it. We are sort of looking at psychological reports almost, or kind of a psychological case study of some kind of psychotherapist called Colin Braithwaite. And we are introduced, Collins Braithwaite, and we're introduced to him quite early in the book. But this book also then starts to play around with what those things actually look like. So the overarching story, at least that we're meant to presume from the beginning, is that a character, somebody called GMB, who I think we're meant to see as Graeme, Macrae, Burnet, inherits or kind of receives this set of notebooks. And these notebooks talk through various bits of psychological sort of study, a little bit of kind of telling the story of a young woman and a little bit of this psychotherapist, Colin Braithwaite, and his interactions. And so we're meant to see these two bits of text as sitting side by side throughout the book. And a key part of what that seems to be, at least on the basic story, is as follows. And you'll notice I keep on saying seems to be, because this book plays around a lot with our ideas of reality. And without going into spoilers here, this is sort of a constant motif throughout the book, where we're always sort of we're always second guessing what's actually happening. We are in some ways being outpaced by the narrator and by the author, and we're trying to keep up. So this young woman goes to a psychotherapist, and she is essentially trying to work out the story of what has happened to her sister. Her sister, who took her own life, had visited this psychotherapist, Colin Braithwaite. And so the sister goes to these sessions pretending to be a completely different person, because she basically wants to understand how these sessions work. So she doesn't want to make it clear at all to this psychotherapist that that she and her sister were related. She doesn't want to give any details that might trigger something in the psychotherapist's mind which might cause him to doubt her. She presents herself as this sort of very middle or upper class woman who is sort of very reserved and very shy, but is suddenly having some kind of episode, or is suddenly struggling with life in some way. And she, at the same time, is trying to find out a little bit more about Colin's technique. She is convinced all the way through that Collins is able to see through what she's doing. And this sort of second character, this sort of alter ego that she's playing, also bleeds a little bit into her personal life, where she starts playing this out with, for example, especially a man who she goes on a couple of dates with. And she sort of seems to enjoy being this other woman and living this other life. But it equally seems to start becoming something quite difficult for her to keep up. Where this intersects with the sort of metatext bit of the book, I guess, is that we also get insights into Colin Braithwaite's life and to his role as this sort of this kind of bright young thing, almost this sort of new rising star in psychotherapy, who is untrained and has these sort of slightly bizarre ideas, but equally we kind of see as sort of almost like a wunderkind kind of character. He's able to see things that other people can't. And so there's also an appeal for our protagonist to go to see him, because there's also a kind of social appeal almost of going there, right? Of kind of like, you know, you've made it, you're kind of going to this famous person. And this is where it starts getting a bit complicated. Now, without going into spoilers at this point, as I mentioned, we are meant to start watching as this unravels. Not only the idea of this young woman going and what the story will be there. Will she be found out? Will she not? Will she find out more about her sister? Will there be some kind of interesting relationship between her and Collins Braithwaite? Is Collins Braithwaite who he says he is? All of these sorts of things all coincide. And the more background we get to Collins Braithwaite, the more that we also start to realise that things might not be great there either. We start to learn that he's a bit more unstable as a character, that he has had sort of a really complicated relationship, not only with his own family, with a sort of, but also with a former partner. He also seems to have problems with drugs and alcohol. And the whole sort of thing sort of spins out a bit from there. And this is where I think this book really excels and is incredibly clever. Of it always makes you think that you're clever and solving it. And just when you think you've kind of solved it, something else gets thrown in. So this reads almost like a kind of detective story in so many ways, but in a really interesting way. Like you can never quite be sure of anything that's there. Like I mentioned, we get GMB at the beginning, which we assume is Graeme Macrae Burnet, but then we also don't know. Like that hasn't actually been spelled out for us, and the whole book is framed as if Graeme Macrae Burnet himself has received these notebooks and is sharing them. But actually, the more we think about that, the less that actually really seems to make sense, because we are aware that we're reading a work of fiction and not autofiction. And so it gets more and more complicated, because actually, where do we sit in this whole thing? What's real, what's not? And I really enjoyed the process of being constantly wrong-footed by this book. I just think it's really clever. It's you know, maybe I'm also just not particularly clever myself in terms of working it out, but I think that is where this book does some really clever things, particularly because we're dealing with psychotherapy, but and as a result, we're dealing with memories, and we're dealing with characters who are losing track of reality, and therefore there's kind of almost to do a drag race thing of a game within a game, but there is almost that kind of Russian doll effect of, we think this thing is real, but actually it's in a context that's unreal, but then actually that's in a context that's unreal itself. So which part do we distrust? And it just keeps building. And I think this is where this book is really exciting. And I cannot do the rest of this without going into spoilers. So what I'm going to do is just kind of do a very quick last bit to say I loved this book. I thought it was really clever. I thought about it quite a lot afterwards. And this is why it edged out a couple of other books for my personal shortlist. Because although I don't think it's perfect, I think it does a lot that's really clever. And I cannot think or imagine how you craft a book like this. I think it's a real achievement of a book. And I would also imagine that it stands up well to rereadings because of that fact. And so as a result, I think it has a better shot. And again, I'm recording this before the shortlist has been announced, so I may be entirely wrong here. But yeah, just a great book, I think. And with that, let's go into some spoilers. So like I mentioned, the idea of reality shifts quite a lot throughout this book. We start to wonder, basically, is Collins Braithwaite a genius, or is he an opportunist? Is he awful? Is he brilliant? Who knows? We also don't know whether our protagonist is real, in the sense that, as I mentioned early on, we kind of get, we learn a lot through her sort of diaries of her going and talking, but she has this very affected way of speaking. Her whole thing is sort of very almost Victorian in its language use. And so as a result, there's almost something surreal and unreal about her, because this book is set in 1965. And actually, would many people of a sort of roughly middle class sort of status have spoken like this? Maybe, maybe not. But she's so distant almost to these other characters that it feels like she's putting on a show. And particularly, it then crosses over into, she works with people who are within the field of drama and therefore acting and putting on shows themselves. So is this whole thing a character creation of hers? Is it somebody else creating characters around her and she doesn't realize what's happening? So many other things going on. Anyway, so she gets more and more into these appointments, but we start to realize through her diaries that she's becoming more and more obsessed with him and obsessed with her own character, to the extent that she starts getting lost in her character. Around the same time that we find out more from the little excerpts about Colin's Braithwaite, that he himself was sort of, his life was in a shambles. And so these two things kind of go side by side, where how much is he really reading the situation correctly, or how much has she overread things or underread things or whatever. And we drive further and further onwards, where we realize that actually this our protagonist doesn't really seem to be as focused on finding out about her sister anymore. This has now become quite a personal thing, where she's desperate to find these things out, to find out more about herself, or to exploit playing around as this character, or to find out more about Colin's Braithwaite, to potentially, do something. But actually, she herself is sort of falling apart. We start to see her have what begin to be the signs of some kind of breakdown. She also starts acting a bit more erratically. Her own personal notes, because we hear this through her, start to become a little bit more fantastical. And she also starts, she meets another person who has been having the same psychotherapist, and she seems to not really understand some of the boundaries around that. There's a sort of some kind of situation that happens with that woman, and she doesn't really know what she's doing there. And it starts to get more and more unreal. And I found it really effective for this, because I think it, again, second guesses, it makes you second guess everything, and it kind of sidesteps you at every possible chance. And so when we end the book, and again with this sort of author's note, ostensibly by the author Graeme Burnet, saying, hey, look, wow, I received these notebooks, and this is all the stuff that happened, and I'm really grateful for everybody who sent me these notebooks. But these notebooks are themselves a piece of fiction created by Graeme Burnet. But again, we've got this sort of sneaky GMB in there, which again, we as a reader assume is Graeme Burnet. But again, I think that door is very much left open by the way this book is framed. All of this is to say, this book is confusing as hell. And I loved it for that. I think I don't think I've really ever been this intentionally confused by a book, and enjoyed that process quite so much. I think this is very, very clever. And I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but this is definitely a 4.5 for me. I kind of hovered over whether to give it a 5, because I think at times I wasn't fully in that. But the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, the more I think I just love it. So maybe a 5. Who knows? I've been Bob the Booker, talking about the Booker Prize, Kill Surprise. This has been the last review of the Booker Longlist for me. I hope you've enjoyed reading them along with me, essentially, or just kind of reading them and hearing the odd kind of bit of rambling from me. But this is why I think this book is on my personal shortlist, because I just think it's pretty exquisite in what it does. And it's just a really fun, engaging puzzle of a book. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.